5 American conflicts, 5 families who prospered from each. This wasn't mere conjecture, it was the result of government agreements. I'll illuminate the blueprint that has enriched the same dynasties with billions while countless lives were extinguished. There exists a business strategy within American history more lucrative than petroleum, more stable than finance, and more safeguarded than any monopoly. For 6 generations, it has elevated the same families to immense wealth, establishing empires that command billions in assets, fueling political aspirations, university endowments, and philanthropic organizations. Its foundation rests on a straightforward principle: capitalizing on every war, any war. For while soldiers fall and citizens bear the financial burden, a select consortium of corporations consistently emerges victorious. The official records of these agreements are publicly accessible. Their financial gains are meticulously documented, and the recurring pattern is irrefutable. The DuPont lineage, renowned for explosives and chemicals, profited from the Revolutionary War through the Iraq War, accumulating 220 years of war-related earnings. The Rockefellers, masters of oil and fuel, benefited from the Civil War through the Afghanistan conflict, a 160-year dominion over energy resources during wartime. The Morgan banking dynasty financed conflicts from the Spanish-American War to World War II, extending credit to governments and profiting from both sides. Predecessors to Lockheed Martin, involved in aviation and armaments, saw continuous defense contracts from World War I to the present day, a span exceeding a century, and Halliburton, providing military logistics and infrastructure, profited from World War II through the War on Terror, accumulating 80 years of non-competitive contracts and inflated expenses. 5 families, 5 corporations, and a tracing of their financial gains across American wars reveals an identical trajectory. War is declared, stock values ascend, contracts are disseminated, profits skyrocket, the war concludes, they retain the earnings, and upon the commencement of the subsequent conflict, they are prepared. This readiness stems not solely from profiting from warfare, but from actively cultivating the conditions that made war unavoidable through strategic lobbying, political contributions, and the shaping of foreign policy. This is not a covert plot. It is the manifestation of capitalism applied to armed conflict. And the evidence is readily available in public records. Allow me to demonstrate its mechanics, conflict by conflict, agreement by agreement, dollar by dollar. We commence with the family that fundamentally established the American military-industrial complex, the DuPonts. While their name might evoke associations with chemicals or Teflon, the DuPont fortune was fundamentally built on gunpowder, and they have supplied explosives for every American war since the year 1802. Let us begin by examining their strategic positioning. Eleuthère Irénée Dupont arrived in America from France in 1800. A skilled chemist who had honed his craft in French gunpowder mills, he perceived a significant opportunity. America had recently concluded a revolution and was embarking on westward expansion. This expansion necessitated a perpetual demand for explosives, for land clearing, for resource extraction, and for military operations. In 1802, he founded the DuPont Company along the Brandywine River in Delaware. The chosen location was strategically advantageous, situated in proximity to Philadelphia and Washington, affording access to water power for his mills, and sufficiently distant from urban centers to mitigate the political repercussions of explosions. By the War of 1812, DuPont was already furnishing gunpowder to the United States military. This marked their inaugural substantial government contract, establishing a precedent that would be replicated for the subsequent 2 centuries. A war would commence. The government would require explosives. DuPont would be prepared with existing manufacturing capabilities. They would secure the contract. Production would be scaled up. Substantial profits would be realized. The war would conclude. They would retain their industrial infrastructure, awaiting the next engagement. The Mexican-American War, spanning from 1846 to 1848, saw DuPont supplying gunpowder for both artillery and small arms. The value of this contract exceeded $1 million, equivalent to approximately $35 million in contemporary currency. However, its true significance lay in solidifying DuPont's status as the government's preferred supplier. When a company has demonstrated its capability during a prior conflict, it naturally holds priority for subsequent ones. The Civil War from 1861 to 1865 represented a watershed moment for DuPont. The Union Army's demand for gunpowder reached unprecedented levels. 4 years of relentless conflict, hundreds of engagements, and millions of projectiles fired necessitated continuous operation. DuPont's mills functioned around the clock, producing over 4 million pounds of gunpowder. The contracts were valued at over $10 million, translating to more than $300 million today, and this figure represents only direct sales. DuPont also supplied gunpowder to private contractors who in turn sold it to the government at an inflated price. This is where the narrative becomes particularly intriguing. The DuPont family members were affiliated with the Northern Democratic Party. They opposed the abolition of slavery. Certain family members even provided political support to the Confederacy. Nevertheless, they supplied gunpowder to the Union because that is where the government contracts were to be found. Ideology played no role. Profit was the sole determinant. And following the war, with the Union's victory, DuPont was perceived as a patriotic enterprise that contributed to the nation's preservation. The complexities of their actual wartime positioning faded into obscurity, leaving only the profit. World War I, from 1914 to 1918, transformed DuPont from a substantial company into a veritable dynasty. Prior to America's entry into the conflict in 1917, DuPont supplied explosives to Great Britain and France, including millions of pounds of gunpowder, TNT, and smokeless powder. Upon America's involvement in the war, DuPont's production capacity escalated dramatically. They constructed new manufacturing facilities, employed thousands of individuals, and furnished 40% of all explosives utilized by the Allied forces. The profits generated were staggering. DuPont's net earnings surged from $5 million in 1914 to $82 million in 1918, a sum exceeding $1 billion in today's valuation. Within a mere 4 years, their profits experienced an increase of 1,600%. And here lies a crucial detail. They did not liquidate these wartime earnings. Instead, they diversified into chemicals, plastics, and synthetic materials, leveraging their war profits to establish a formidable peacetime empire. Yet, their military supply operations did not cease. World War II ushered in another period of significant expansion. DuPont provided explosives, manufactured nylon for parachutes, and played a crucial role in the Manhattan Project. They operated the plutonium production facility at Hanford, Washington, under a cost-plus contract, a system that guaranteed reimbursement for all expenses plus a predetermined profit margin, effectively eliminating any financial risk for the company. The government assumed all associated liabilities: the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the Iraq War. In every conflict, DuPont or its successor entities continued to supply essential materials. By the 2000s, DuPont's defense division had been divested and integrated into other corporations, yet the family's accumulated wealth persisted. The DuPont Family Trust is currently valued at an estimated $30 billion. 6 generations removed from Eleuthère-Irénée, they continue to benefit from the profits generated by gunpowder. Now let us turn our attention to the Rockefellers. Oil, the indispensable resource for any modern military, and the family that maintained a century-long monopoly over it. John D. Rockefeller established Standard Oil in 1870. By 1880, he controlled 90% of America's oil refining capacity. This was not merely a business enterprise, it was an absolute monopoly. And when America engaged in warfare, this monopoly transformed into a vital strategic asset. The Spanish-American War in 1898, though modest in scale, was of significant consequence. The United States Navy had transitioned from coal-powered vessels to oil-powered ships throughout the 1890s, rendering Standard Oil indispensable. Naval fleets required a constant supply of fuel oil. The war concluded within a few months, but it unequivocally established oil as a military necessity. Rockefeller supplied the necessary fuel for the fleet and gleaned a crucial insight: control the fuel, and you control the military. World War I marked the advent of industrial warfare, where oil played a decisive role. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, and ships all relied on petroleum products. Standard Oil, despite its antitrust-induced dissolution in 1911, continued to exert dominance through its various successor companies, including Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, all of which remained under Rockefeller control. They supplied fuel to both the United States military and the Allied forces. The contracts were valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. However, the Rockefeller strategy diverged from that of DuPont in a crucial aspect. They did not exclusively supply one side. Standard Oil's German subsidiary provided fuel to Germany. Even after America entered the war, Rockefeller-affiliated companies continued to engage in trade with Germany through neutral nations. This was not an act of treason, but rather shrewd business practice, and it was perfectly legal as the companies were technically distinct entities. The profits derived from both sides of World War I propelled the Rockefellers to become the wealthiest family in America. John D. Rockefeller attained the distinction of becoming the world's first billionaire, and the family expanded its interests into banking, real estate, and philanthropy, with oil remaining their foundational enterprise. World War II mirrored the established pattern. Rockefeller-affiliated companies supplied fuel to the United States military, securing exclusive cost-plus contracts that guaranteed substantial profits. Standard Oil of New Jersey, a precursor to Exxon, faced scrutiny for its dealings with Nazi Germany through its subsidiaries. Investigations revealed that Standard Oil had shared patents for synthetic rubber with the German chemical conglomerate IG Farben, even after the commencement of hostilities. This transfer of technology significantly aided Germany's war effort. Senator Harry Truman, prior to his presidency, spearheaded this investigation. His committee concluded that Standard Oil's actions had detrimental consequences for the war effort. Nevertheless, no legal action was pursued, as the company's importance to the military's fuel supply was paramount. Consequently, the investigation was quietly shelved, and the lucrative contracts remained in place. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, every subsequent conflict necessitated a steady supply of oil, and Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, the corporate descendants of the Rockefeller enterprises, consistently fulfilled this demand. The profits were so immense that by the 1970s, the Rockefeller family began divesting their holdings in the oil industry to avoid undue political attention. However, their accumulated wealth remained substantial. The estimated net worth of the Rockefeller family today stands at $11 billion, a fortune amassed through the sale of oil to armies that consumed it in the pursuit of war. Now let us consider the Morgan banking dynasty and the financing of warfare. Wars not only require weaponry and fuel, they demand capital, and those who provide this capital stand to profit irrespective of the conflict's outcome. J.P. Morgan established his banking empire in the 1870s. By 1900, J.P. Morgan and Company had become the preeminent financial institution in America. Morgan keenly understood a principle that would define a century of wartime profits. Governments engaged in conflict are prepared to borrow at any interest rate, as they possess no viable alternative to defeat. The Spanish-American War of 1898 was partially financed through Morgan's loans to the United States government. While a relatively minor conflict, it cemented the critical relationship. The government developed a trust in Morgan, and Morgan in turn profited from the accrued interest. World War I presented a vastly different scenario. When hostilities erupted in Europe in 1914, America maintained official neutrality. However, American banks, spearheaded by J.P. Morgan, extended significant loans to Great Britain and France, totaling over $2 billion between 1914 and 1917, a sum equivalent to over $50 billion in today's currency. These loans were utilized to procure armaments, provisions, and other essential supplies, a substantial portion of which originated from American companies. Thus, American banks provided financial backing to the Allies, who then allocated these funds to purchase goods from American enterprises, creating a circular flow of capital with profits accruing to both ends. Herein lies a pivotal detail. These loans rendered American neutrality untenable. By 1917, Britain and France owed such substantial sums to American banks that their potential defeat would have precipitated a severe financial crisis within the United States. Should they default on their obligations, American banks would face collapse, leading to a catastrophic economic downturn. Consequently, when President Wilson formally requested congressional approval for a declaration of war in April 1917, the motivations extended beyond the defense of democracy or condemnation of German aggression. It was intrinsically linked to the safeguarding of American financial interests. Senator George Norris of Nebraska articulated this point with striking clarity during the debate on the declaration of war, stating, "We are going into war at the command of gold. We are about to place the dollar sign on the American flag." Despite his dissenting vote, Congress ultimately approved the declaration of war, and J.P. Morgan's loans were effectively underwritten by the impending might of the American military. Following the war, Morgan reaped further benefits. Germany was obligated to pay reparations to the Allied nations, and the Allies in turn owed debts to the United States. Morgan orchestrated the financial arrangements that enabled Germany to meet its reparation payments, which the Allies then used to settle their debts with America. Morgan collected substantial fees at each stage of this complex process. The Dawes Plan in 1924 and the Young Plan in 1929, both meticulously structured by Morgan bankers, facilitated the refinancing of billions of dollars in war debts, with Morgan earning millions in associated fees. World War II adhered to an identical financial framework. Prior to America's direct involvement in the war, Morgan banks provided financing for British wartime procurements. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States government embarked on extensive borrowing to finance the war effort. Morgan banks played a crucial role in underwriting war bonds and treasury securities, collecting fees on every issuance. Post-war reconstruction efforts also saw significant involvement from Morgan banks. The Marshall Plan, instrumental in rebuilding Europe, was partially administered through institutions with connections to Morgan. The Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Each protracted conflict necessitated substantial financial backing, and Morgan banks, by then consolidated into J.P. Morgan Chase, consistently participated, underwriting government debt, financing defense contractors, and profiting from interest and fees. While the Morgan family is no longer directly involved in the day-to-day operations of the bank, their vast wealth persists. The family's estimated fortune stands at $30 billion, amassed through lending capital for wars and collecting interest while soldiers perished and taxpayers bore the ultimate cost. Now, let us examine the trajectory of Lockheed Martin, or more precisely, the companies that eventually merged to form Lockheed Martin, recognizing that military aviation has been a lucrative sector since World War I. The Logg brothers, later known as Lockheed, established their aircraft company in 1912. By the time of World War I, they were engaged in building aircraft for the military, initially with limited contracts and experimental designs. However, aviation represented the future, and the companies that entered the market early positioned themselves for a century of sustained profitability. World War I saw the nascent deployment of aircraft, primarily for reconnaissance and limited bombing operations, yet the potential for their military application was evident. Following the war, military aviation contracts dwindled, leading to the bankruptcy of many aircraft manufacturers. Lockheed, however, managed to survive by producing civilian aircraft, while diligently maintaining its connections within the military sphere. World War II proved to be their pivotal turning point. Aircraft became indispensable elements of warfare, with bombers, fighter jets, and transport planes playing critical roles. Lockheed manufactured the P-38 Lightning fighter, with over 10,000 units produced, and the Hudson bomber, with over 2,800 units manufactured. The contracts associated with these aircraft were valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. However, Lockheed's strategic innovation extended beyond mere aircraft production. They cultivated robust relationships within the Pentagon. They actively recruited former military officers for executive positions and strategically located their manufacturing facilities within congressional districts where representatives required employment opportunities for their constituents, thereby rendering the company politically insulated. Following World War II, the protracted Cold War ensured a continuous stream of lucrative contracts. Lockheed developed the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the C-130 cargo plane, which remains in active service to this day. Each decade brought new contractual opportunities, and Lockheed's operational strategy remained consistent: produce sufficiently capable aircraft, underestimate projected costs to secure the initial contract, and subsequently seek additional funding, citing unforeseen project complexities. The Pentagon consistently acquiesced, as canceling a project would necessitate admitting substantial financial mismanagement. The C-5 Galaxy transport plane exemplifies this pattern perfectly. The initial contract, awarded in 1965, was valued at $2.1 billion. By the time of delivery, the actual cost had escalated to $5.3 billion, representing a 150% cost overrun. Did Lockheed incur financial losses? Absolutely not. Under a cost-plus contract, they were reimbursed for all expenses plus a guaranteed profit margin. The Pentagon found itself unable to cancel the project, having already committed billions of dollars. Consequently, they continued to fund it, and Lockheed reaped the financial benefits, with Congress approving the escalating costs due to the employment opportunities provided to thousands in Georgia, a strategically important state. The Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, each conflict generated significant contracts for Lockheed. By the 1990s, the defense industry was undergoing substantial consolidation. Lockheed merged with Martin Marietta in 1995, forming Lockheed Martin. Today, it stands as the world's largest defense contractor, reporting $65 billion in revenue in 2023, with 90% derived from government contracts, and the established pattern persists. The F-35 fighter jet, the most expensive weapons program in history, initially budgeted at $233 billion, now carries an estimated cost exceeding $1.7 trillion, a truly staggering sum, representing a seven-fold overrun. Lockheed continues to receive payment as the Pentagon absorbs all cost overruns because project cancellation is no longer feasible due to the immense investment, the critical employment stakes, and the dependence of numerous congressional districts on its continuation. While the Lockheed family no longer exercises direct control over the company, which is now publicly traded, its shareholders continue to profit, and the pattern established over a century remains unbroken. War is declared, Lockheed's stock value escalates, contracts are awarded, costs spiral, the government pays, shareholders profit, and the cycle repeats. Now consider Halliburton, a company that transformed military logistics into an art form. Halliburton was founded in 1919 by Earl P. Halliburton. Initially, it operated as an oil field services company specializing in cementing oil wells. However, the founder recognized the lucrative potential of infrastructure development, whether for the oil industry or for military purposes. By World War II, Halliburton was actively involved in constructing bases, airfields, and ports for the military. Their operational model was straightforward. The military required rapid infrastructure development. Halliburton possessed the necessary expertise and equipment. They secured no-bid contracts as the urgency of the situation precluded competitive bidding processes. They constructed the required facilities. Cost-plus contracts ensured reimbursement for all expenses, plus a guaranteed profit, eliminating any financial risk for the company. The Korean War saw Halliburton engaged in the construction of bases and infrastructure. The Vietnam War represented a significantly larger undertaking. Through its subsidiary, Brown & Root, Halliburton was responsible for building roads, ports, and airfields throughout South Vietnam. The contracts were valued in the billions of dollars and were awarded without competitive bidding due to Brown & Root's established political connections. This is where the influence of political connections becomes critically important. George Brown, the founder of Brown & Root, was a significant financial supporter of Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson's political career had, in part, been financed by Brown. When Johnson ascended to the presidency, Brown & Root received massive contracts for Vietnam infrastructure projects. While one might dismiss this as mere coincidence, the underlying pattern is undeniable: political contributions, access to power, government contracts, and subsequent profit. The Gulf War in 1991 saw Halliburton's reemergence. Dick Cheney served as Secretary of Defense. Halliburton was awarded contracts to construct facilities in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Following the war, Cheney transitioned from government service to become the chief executive officer of Halliburton in 1995. He led the company until the year 2000, when he assumed the role of vice president under George W. Bush. Subsequently, the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan unfolded. Halliburton, through its subsidiary KBR, secured contracts valued at over $40 billion. These were no-bid contracts with cost-plus pricing. Halliburton undertook the construction of bases, provided catering services, supplied fuel, and managed logistical operations, all at astronomical costs. The Pentagon's Inspector General identified billions of dollars in waste and overcharges. Halliburton billed the government for meals that were never served, for fuel deliveries that never occurred, and for construction projects that remained incomplete. When questioned about these discrepancies, Halliburton contended that the chaotic nature of war zones rendered some level of waste unavoidable. The government concurred and continued to provide funding. Dick Cheney, in his capacity as vice president, recused himself from any contractual decisions involving Halliburton. However, his former company experienced a dramatic increase in government contracts during his tenure, exceeding any previous period. From 2003 to 2008, Halliburton's government contracts saw a 400% surge and its stock price tripled. Upon leaving office in 2009, Cheney still retained Halliburton stock options valued in the millions. This exemplifies the consistent pattern. A company recruits former politicians as executives. These executives leverage their government connections, and when wars commence, these relationships translate into lucrative contracts, with the profits being shared. Politicians retire into financial comfort, companies amass further wealth, and the taxpayers bear the ultimate financial burden. Now, allow me to illustrate this overarching pattern across all 5 examples, for it is not merely the fact that these families profited from war, but the specific methodologies they employed. The identical strategy has been replicated for 150 years. Step 1. Establish a strategic position prior to the conflict. All 5 companies successfully positioned themselves as indispensable entities before hostilities began. DuPont meticulously built its explosive manufacturing capacity during peacetime. Rockefeller achieved a monopoly in oil refining. Morgan cultivated robust banking relationships. Lockheed meticulously maintained its military contracts between wartime periods. Halliburton developed extensive infrastructure expertise. When war erupted, they were fully prepared, unlike their competitors. Step 2. Secured the initial contract. Governments require immediate supplies during wartime. There is insufficient time for competitive bidding processes. The companies that had already established their presence are awarded no-bid contracts, with the justification invariably being national security. We cannot afford to wait for bids. We need it immediately. Once the initial contract is secured, subsequent agreements become considerably easier to obtain, as the company is recognized as a proven and reliable supplier. Step 3. Implement cost-plus pricing. Virtually every significant war contract awarded since the Civil War has utilized a cost-plus model. Under this arrangement, the contractor bills the government for all incurred costs along with a predetermined profit margin. This effectively eliminates all financial risk for the contractor. Should costs escalate beyond initial projections, the government assumes the additional expense. If a project extends beyond its anticipated timeline, the contractor realizes greater profits. The objective is to inflate expenses, not diminish them. Moving to step 4. Exceeding the allocated budget. Every significant military hardware system developed over the past 50 years has experienced cost overruns. The F-35 program, for instance, went over budget 7-fold. The Zumwalt-class destroyer project saw costs triple. The littoral combat ship doubled its initial estimate. This is not a reflection of ineptitude. It is the established modus operandi. Companies deliberately underbid to secure contracts, subsequently revising their cost projections upwards. The government finds itself unable to cancel these projects due to the substantial investments already made. Consequently, they disburse further funds, allowing the contractors to capitalize on the increased expenditure. Step 5 involves co-opting regulatory bodies. When military officials retire, their next career often lies within defense contracting firms. Generals who previously authorized contracts for Lockheed now occupy executive positions within Lockheed. Admirals who supervise naval shipbuilding programs join shipbuilding corporations. This well-trodden path between the Pentagon and the defense industry is so deeply ingrained, it has been given a specific designation. It ensures that those responsible for awarding contracts maintain personal connections that will yield future advantages. Step 6. Advocating for increased military engagement. This represents the most somber aspect of the system. Defense contractors expend millions of dollars on lobbying efforts directed at Congress. They contribute financially to political campaigns. They also provide funding to think tanks that generate reports and analyses promoting military intervention. Institutions such as the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the American Enterprise Institute have received financial backing from defense contractors, and both have consistently published research that supports the initiation of military action. During the deliberations surrounding the invasion of Iraq in 2002, defense contractors financed organizations that produced intelligence assessments favorable to an invasion. They funded advertisements and employed retired generals to advocate for war on news programs. Upon the authorization of hostilities, these same contractors were awarded multi-billion-dollar contracts. Did they instigate the Iraq War? No. However, they cultivated an environment where conflict was more probable and subsequently profited from its occurrence. Step 7. Diversifying profit streams. Earnings derived from wartime activities are not solely confined to weaponry. DuPont utilized profits from explosives manufacturing to establish a vast chemical conglomerate. Rockefeller leveraged profits from oil sales to acquire banks and real estate holdings. Morgan's banking interests capitalized on war financing to fund peacetime industrial ventures. These companies diversify their operations so that their accumulated wealth persists even after conflicts conclude. The families at the helm of these corporations evolve into dynastic entities, accumulating wealth across generations through the proceeds of war. Now allow me to illustrate the magnitude of these financial flows. What level of profit are we contemplating? DuPont's total revenue derived from military contracts since 1802 is estimated to exceed $50 billion, adjusted for inflation. Companies associated with Rockefeller have generated over $100 billion from fuel sales to the military since 1898. The interest and fees earned by Morgan banks from war financing are estimated at over $75 billion. Lockheed Martin and its predecessor entities have secured over $200 billion in contracts for aircraft and related systems since 1917. Halliburton has amassed over $60 billion from logistics and infrastructure support since 1942. Collectively, these 5 companies and their historical predecessors have siphoned more than $485 billion from American taxpayers through war-related contracts. This figure represents documented, publicly accessible contract values. It does not encompass indirect profits, increases in stock valuations, real estate acquired with wartime earnings, or industries established utilizing wartime capital. If these additional elements were included, the total sum would exceed $1 trillion. And here is a critical detail. This capital originated from taxpayers. Every dollar paid to DuPont for explosives was derived from American workers through taxation. Every dollar paid to Halliburton for logistical services was financed through deficit spending, the repayment of which will fall upon future generations. These are not typical business profits. This represents a transfer of public funds into private hands, justified by the necessity of warfare. Therefore, the question you should be posing is whether this practice persists today. Indeed it does. Allow me to present the current figures. In 2023, the United States military budget stood at $816 billion. The 5 largest defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman, collectively received over $200 billion in contracts. This constitutes 25% of the entire defense budget being allocated to just 5 corporations, and the established pattern continues. These companies employ former Pentagon officials. They engage in extensive lobbying of Congress. They strategically locate manufacturing facilities. The F-35 program, developed by Lockheed, involves suppliers situated in 45 states. This geographical distribution is deliberate. It ensures that 90 senators have constituents employed by the program. To vote against the F-35 program would be tantamount to voting against job creation within their respective states. Consequently, Congress continues to fund it despite it being 7 times over budget, years behind schedule, and exhibiting over 800 documented deficiencies. The modus operandi established by DuPont in 1802 endures to this day. War is a lucrative endeavor for corporations, their shareholders, their executives, and politicians who benefit from campaign donations and subsequent post-retirement employment. The sole parties who do not reap financial rewards are the soldiers who engage in combat and the taxpayers who bear the financial burden. Now, allow me to present something that should provoke your indignation: the opportunity cost. What could America have accomplished with $485 billion if it had not been directed towards war profiteering? That sum could fund free college education for every American student for a period of 20 years. It could facilitate the construction of high-speed rail networks connecting every major urban center. It could provide universal health care coverage for a decade. It could enable the comprehensive renovation of every bridge and road across the nation. It could finance cancer research for an entire century. Instead, it was allocated to the procurement of explosives, fuel, weaponry, and logistical support for conflicts. Some of these conflicts were indeed necessary, but many were not. And while corporations amassed profits, the public good languished. This discussion is not about the justification of past wars. Some were undoubtedly necessary. World War II, for instance, was imperative. However, even such essential conflicts were exploited for financial gain. Furthermore, numerous wars were instigated, prolonged, or escalated precisely because they were profitable. The Vietnam War could have concluded years earlier had defense contractors not lobbied for its continuation. The invasion of Iraq was predicated on unsubstantiated intelligence, some of which was generated by think tanks funded by contractors. Afghanistan evolved into a 20-year occupation, partly because contractors profited immensely from rebuilding infrastructure that had been destroyed. The pursuit of profit did not initiate these conflicts, but it undeniably extended their duration and escalated their financial burden beyond what was essential. Here is the concluding element of this pattern. The entities involved are virtually immune to repercussions. Despite evidence of inflated pricing, fraudulent practices, and excessive profiteering, no individuals face incarceration. DuPont underwent investigation for monopolistic practices related to explosives in the 1930s. However, no significant consequences ensued. Standard Oil was dissolved due to its monopolistic power, yet the Rockefellers retained their wealth and their companies eventually consolidated once more. Morgan banks were investigated for profiting from wartime activities following World War I. No prosecutions were initiated. Halliburton was investigated for overcharging during the Iraq War. They paid a penalty, continued to receive contracts, and maintained their profitable operations. Lockheed was investigated for bribing foreign officials to secure weapons sales. They paid a fine, but their executives faced no jail time. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Investigations uncover transgressions. Fines are levied. These fines represent a fraction of the profits generated. No individuals are held criminally accountable. The corporations persist in their operations. This pattern endures because these companies are deemed too vital to prosecute. The military relies upon them. Congress depends on them for the economic well-being of their districts. The national economy is intertwined with their existence. Consequently, they receive protection even when they violate the law. 5 families, 5 corporations, spanning 150 years, involved in every major American conflict, and the pattern remains identical each time. Position yourselves before the conflict begins. Secure the contracts, inflate the costs, recruit the regulators, lobby for more engagement, and profit while others perish. This is not a matter of clandestine plotting. It is thoroughly documented historical fact. The contracts are publicly accessible. The profits are meticulously recorded. The pattern is indisputable, and it is ongoing. The only remaining question is whether anyone will intervene to halt it. History suggests this is unlikely, as these corporations wield excessive power. Politicians are overly reliant upon them, and the public is too preoccupied to offer sustained attention. If this explanation has altered your perspective on military expenditure, if you now comprehend that war is in essence a business model, then you are beginning to discern the underlying pattern. 5 families accumulating billions in profit derived from wars that have claimed millions of lives. Subscribe if you wish to gain a deeper understanding of how power truly operates. Because this knowledge will not be imparted in traditional educational settings. Instead, you will likely be taught that these companies are patriotic, that they serve the nation, and that war profiteering is merely a conspiratorial notion. However, the contracts are part of the public record, and this pattern has been repeated for 150 years. 5 families participating in every war, achieving the same outcome. They profit, we pay, and soldiers endure the consequences.